The night it finally ended, I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing the same coffee mug I'd been rinsing for 3 years, and I heard my daughter-in-law laugh. Not at anything funny on television, not at something my son said. She was laughing at me. I didn't turn around. I just stood there with the water running over my hands, watching it drain. And I thought, tomorrow. My name is Harriet. I'm 68 years old, and for most of those years I believed that family was the one thing you could count on when everything else fell apart. I believed it when my husband Gerald passed from a sudden heart attack 6 years ago, leaving me alone in our house in Dayton, Ohio. The house we'd bought in 1987 for $94,000 and paid off entirely by 2009. I believed it when my son Philip called me 2 weeks after the funeral and said, "Mom, you shouldn't be rattling around in that big house alone. Come stay with us. We have the room." I believed it right up until the moment I stopped believing anything he told me. What I didn't tell Philip on that phone call, what I didn't tell anyone for a long time, was that the house he was inviting me to live in was the same house I had purchased for him and his wife Renata as a wedding gift in 2014. Gerald and I had paid $287,000 for a 4-bedroom colonial in Westerville, outside Columbus, because Philip's company was relocating there and because we wanted to do something lasting for our son. We put it in his name. We did it out of love. I want you to remember that detail, because it matters more than anything else I'm about to tell you. I arrived on a Saturday in March with 2 suitcases and a box of books. Philip helped me carry them in. He looked thinner than I remembered, a little distracted, checking his phone while we walked up the front steps. I painted those shutters myself when we first bought the house. Dark green. They'd repainted them gray at some point. I didn't say anything. Renata met us at the door. She was wearing exercise clothes and holding a smoothie, and she smiled the way someone smiles when they've practiced it. "Harriet," she said, "so good to have you." She did not hug me. Their daughter Chloe was 7 then, shy and sweet with her father's eyes. She was the one who reached up and took my hand while Philip was hauling in my second suitcase. "Your room has a window that faces the backyard," she told me, very seriously. "You can see the bird feeder." "That sounds perfect," I said. And I meant it. The room was the smallest of the 4 bedrooms. It had a single window, a twin bed that had been in there since before I arrived, and a closet about the size of a coat rack. I didn't complain. I set up my books on the windowsill, put Gerald's photograph on the nightstand, and told myself this was a new chapter. I was trying so hard to believe that. The first sign came within 2 weeks. I had always cooked. It was one of the ways I showed love. Long Sunday dinners, pots of soup on cold afternoons, the kind of cooking that filled a house with smell and warmth. Gerald used to say my pot roast was the only thing that made winter bearable, so I cooked. I made a full dinner that first Sunday: roasted chicken, green beans with almonds, mashed potatoes from scratch. I set the table, called everyone down, felt genuinely hopeful. Renata looked at the chicken and said, "We usually do something lighter on Sundays. Philip's been watching his cholesterol." Philip didn't correct her. He helped himself to a small portion and spent the meal on his phone. I told myself she was right. I could adjust. I started making lighter meals, salads, grilled fish, things I knew weren't really comfort food, but that I thought they'd prefer. A few weeks later, I made a pasta dish. Renata said she was trying to cut carbs. I made a stir-fry with vegetables from the farmer's market. She said the smell was too strong. I made a simple baked salmon with lemon and dill. She served Chloe a bowl of cereal instead and said she was trying to get her used to simpler foods. I stopped cooking dinner after that. I told myself I was respecting their preferences. What I was actually doing was starting to disappear. There's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being surrounded by people who act like you aren't there. Mealtimes became something I moved through quickly. I learned their schedule. Renata worked from home 3 days a week. Philip left early and came home late. Chloe was at school until 3. I arranged my days around the empty hours, when I could sit in the kitchen with a cup of tea and feel like I had some small claim on the space. I started taking long walks, Not because I needed the exercise, but because the house felt smaller every week. I called my friend Dolores in Dayton every Sunday. She always asked how it was going. I always said, "Oh, fine, adjusting." She knew me well enough to know what that meant. One afternoon, I found Renata on the phone in the kitchen, talking to someone I didn't know. She lowered her voice when I came in, then moved to the dining room and closed the door partway. I made my tea, slow as I could, listening to the silence on the other side of that door, and I thought about how, in another version of this life, that kitchen was mine. I owned the mortgage documents. I had signed the deed transfer with Gerald sitting next to me, both of us smiling. 6 months in, I tried. I sat down with Philip one evening after Renata had gone to bed. I told him I felt like I was living around the edges of their life instead of in it. I said I missed feeling useful. I asked if there was something I could do. Help with Chloe's school pickups, take on some grocery shopping, anything. He looked at me with an expression I recognized from when he was 15 years old, and I caught him in some small lie. Not guilty exactly, just uncomfortable. "Mom," he said, "Renata has a system. She just likes things a certain way." "I understand that," I said. "I'm just asking how I fit in." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Just give her time." I gave her time. I gave her almost 2 more years. I want to tell you about the night of November 4th, because that was the night I understood that giving people time doesn't work if they've already made up their minds. I had spent the day making a pot of beef stew. I know I said I'd stopped cooking dinners, but Chloe had a cold that week and had asked me, specifically, if I would make something warm. "The soup kind of dinner, Grandma Harriet," she said. So I went to Kroger myself, bought good beef chuck and root vegetables, and spent 4 hours making it the way my mother had taught me. Philip came home. Chloe was already at the table waiting. I ladled out bowls and set the bread basket down. Renata came into the kitchen, looked at the stew, and made a sound. Not words exactly, just a sound. The kind you make when you smell something you find unpleasant. She picked up her bowl, walked to the sink, and poured it down the drain. Then she ordered Thai takeout on her phone. Chloe watched all of this. She was 9 by then, old enough to understand what had just happened. She looked at me and her face went through 6 different things in about 3 seconds. "I'll have some," Chloe said quietly. "That's all right, sweetheart," I told her. "Enjoy your dinner." I went to my room. I sat on the edge of the twin bed and looked at Gerald's photograph. I did not cry. I was past crying. I was somewhere beyond it, a place that feels very still and very clear, like the air after a storm. I thought about the house, about the deed, about the $287,000, and I thought, not yet, but soon. The thing about Renata was that she never raised her voice at me. She never said anything directly cruel. She was too careful for that. What she did was make me feel, systematically and consistently, like a problem that hadn't been solved yet. She started rearranging the things I kept in common spaces. A plant I'd brought from Dayton appeared in the garage. A framed photo of Gerald and me at Niagara Falls, which I'd placed on the hallway table, was in my room one afternoon without any explanation. My coffee maker, a simple Mr. Mina coffee I'd had for 9 years, was replaced on the counter by a pod machine, and mine was in the cabinet under the sink. I retrieved the coffee maker. I put it back. The next day it was under the sink again. I retrieved it again. I made my coffee. I stood at the window and drank it while I watched the birds. 3 days later, I came downstairs and found my coffee maker outside on the back porch. It had rained. That was when I called my attorney. I want to be careful here, because I know what some people will think. They'll say I should have spoken up sooner. They'll say I let it go on too long. Maybe they're right, but I want you to understand something about being a mother, about being a grandmother, about being a woman of 68 who still carries the instinct that family is worth fighting for, even when it's fighting against you. I stayed because of Chloe. I stayed because every time I thought about leaving, I saw her face in the doorway of my room, asking if I wanted to play Uno, asking if I knew how to make biscuits, asking me to tell her about what Philip was like when he was her age. And I stayed because some part of me kept waiting for my son to be the man I had raised him to be. He never showed up. My attorney's name is Patricia, and she's been practicing family and property law in Ohio for 22 years. I'd worked with her briefly when Gerald passed, settling his accounts. She remembered me. I explained the situation over the phone. The house, the deed, the living arrangement. What had been happening over 3 years. She listened without interrupting. "Harriet," she said when I finished, "are they paying you any rent?" "No." "Any formal agreement in writing? Any understanding of terms?" "Nothing." "And your name isn't on the deed. You transferred it outright." "We did. In 2014. She was quiet for a moment. "Okay, then what we're looking at is a license to occupy, not a tenancy, which actually works in your favor here. But I want to be very clear with you. Do you want to pursue this?" I looked at the phone in my hand. I looked around my small room, at Gerald's photograph, at my book stacked on the windowsill, at the bird feeder Chloe had pointed out to me the day I arrived. "Yes," I said, "I want to pursue this." What Patricia explained to me changed the way I understood my own situation. Because I had given the house as a gift and held no ownership, I couldn't simply reclaim it. That part of the story was gone. But what I did have was documentation. Bank records going back to 2014, showing that Gerald and I had never received a cent of rent. Records of the original purchase, and, most critically, a pattern of what Ohio courts recognize as constructive eviction from a shared living arrangement. But Patricia said something else that I hadn't considered. She said, "Harriet, do you have documentation of the original gift? The transfer? The original purchase receipts?" I did. Gerald was meticulous. I had a folder in my second suitcase. I'd brought it from Dayton out of habit, the way you bring important papers when you're unsure of things. With the original deed transfer, the HUD settlement statement, the gift letter we'd filed for tax purposes. Patricia went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think we should also look at whether a gift of this magnitude, made without any consideration of your future housing needs, and followed by treatment that has effectively rendered you homeless within the home, constitutes grounds for a different kind of claim." I didn't understand all of it at first, but I trusted her. We began to build a case. During those months, I kept my face very still. I kept being polite at breakfast, kept making my own coffee, kept taking my long walks. Renata never knew anything had changed. Philip was too distracted to notice me at the best of times. Only Chloe noticed something, because children always do. "You seem different, Grandma Harriet," she said one Saturday morning. We were putting together a puzzle at the kitchen table. 1,000 pieces. A covered bridge in Vermont. "Different how?" I asked. She considered it seriously, the way children consider things when they're actually paying attention. "Like you decided something," she said. "I did," I told her. I kissed the top of her head. "I decided things are going to be okay." She went back to the puzzle. "Good," she said. "I think so too." On a Tuesday in February, I asked Philip to sit down with me after dinner. He looked wary. He'd been looking wary around me for months, some part of him sensing the stillness I'd developed, the way animals sense weather changes. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and folded his hands. I placed a document in front of him. There was a letter from Patricia's office, laying out the findings of our review, the original purchase, the gift documentation, the tax records, and the formal notice that I was requesting. Under Ohio revised code provisions, and in light of 3 years of documented mistreatment in the shared dwelling, a mediated settlement, specifically a structured buyout of the property's original gift value, adjusted for current market appreciation, paid to me over a defined schedule, or alternatively, my right to occupy a dedicated and respected portion of the premises, formalized in writing. I had also attached, paperclip to the back, a detailed log I had kept for the past 4 months. Dates, incidents, specific descriptions. The stew poured down the drain. The coffee maker on the porch in the rain. The photograph moved from the hallway. All of it. Philip didn't speak for a long time. He read the first page, then the second, then just stared at the table. "Mom," he finally said. His voice sounded strange. Then, "I don't want to fight with you," I told him. "I never did. But I raised you, Philip. I gave you everything I could, including that house, and I came here because you asked me to, and I have been treated as though I don't exist. I won't accept that anymore." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Renata is going to—" He started. "I know," I said. "That's between the two of you. I won't pretend the next 6 weeks were easy." They weren't. Renata was furious in the way that people were furious when they realize they've underestimated someone. She stopped speaking to me directly, communicated only through Philip, who looked more exhausted every day. There were evenings when the tension in that house was so thick I could feel it pressing against my chest. But I had Patricia, and I had my log, and I had Gerald's meticulous folder of papers. The mediation took 2 sessions. Renata brought her own attorney. Philip sat between them looking like a man who'd realized too late that he'd been making choices all along without understanding their weight. The settlement was this. Philip and Renata would pay me $1,400 per month, a figure reflecting partial market rent for my occupancy, with a structured acknowledgement of the gift's original value, until I chose to leave or until Chloe turned 18, at which point the arrangement would be renegotiated. I retained the right to shared common spaces without interference. My belongings were not to be moved or removed without my consent. It was all in writing. Was it everything? No. I had given them a house worth close to $400,000 by current appraisal, and I was receiving a fraction of what that represented. But that wasn't the point. The point was, the morning after we signed, I came downstairs before anyone else was up. I made my coffee in my Mr. Prober coffee, which was back on the counter where it belonged. I opened the back door and stood in the February cold in my robe and my slippers, holding the mug in both hands, watching the bird feeder. There was a cardinal, a male, brilliant red against the gray morning. He sat there for almost a full minute before he flew away. Gerald used to say, cardinals were good luck. He said his mother told him that when a cardinal appears, it's a visitor from someone you've lost. I don't know if I believe that, but I stood there anyway, in the cold, with my coffee, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. I felt like I was in my house. Chloe found me there a few minutes later. She had her winter coat thrown over her pajamas, and her hair was still sleep-tangled. "There was a cardinal," I told her. "I know," she said. "I saw it from my window." She leaned against me. "Are you staying, Grandma Harriet?" I put my arm around her. "For now," I said. She nodded, like that was the right answer. "Okay," she said. "Do you want to make biscuits?" "I do," I said. So we went inside and we made biscuits, and the kitchen smelled like butter and warmth, and for the first time in a long time, I let it. I want to say something to anyone who is listening to this, and recognizing their own life in it. If you've given to your children your time, your money, your home, your presence, and they have taken it without seeing you, without honoring what it cost you, you are not invisible. You only feel that way because they've spent a long time trying to make you believe it. The hardest thing I ever did was not the mediation. It was the 3 years before it, when I kept loving people who had quietly decided I wasn't worth the effort. I don't know what Philip and I will become. Some mornings he's at the kitchen table when I come down, and we drink our coffee without talking, and it feels like the beginning of something. Some mornings he leaves before I'm up, and I don't see him until evening, and he doesn't quite meet my eyes. I'm not waiting for him anymore. I'm washing the bird feeder. I'm making biscuits with my granddaughter. I'm calling Dolores on Sundays and finally being honest when she asks how things are going, and when she asks, I say, better. Finally. I've had a lot of time to think about what really happened in that house. Not the incidents themselves, the stew, the coffee maker, the photograph moved from the hallway, but the pattern underneath them. Because cruelty like Renata's doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small, deniable steps. A sound at the dinner table. A smoothie held like a shield. A door pulled partway shut during a phone call. Each thing alone is nothing. Together, they're everything. What I understand now is that the people who treated me as invisible were counting on something specific. That I would accept invisibility as my portion. That I had given enough of myself, my money, my home, my presence, that I had nothing left to bargain with. They were wrong. And I think some part of them always knew they were wrong, which is why Philip could never quite meet my eyes. Here's what I believe about cause and effect, and I believe it without any doctrine attached to it, just from 68 years of watching how people live. The way you treat the people who love you unconditionally is, eventually, the life you build for yourself. Renata poured that stew down the drain and felt powerful in that moment. What she was actually doing was pouring away whatever goodwill remained between us. You cannot spend years making someone feel worthless and then be surprised when they stop absorbing it. Philip's part in this is harder for me to reckon with because he's my son and I spent 30 years learning to love him before I had to learn to stop excusing him. A weak person is not an evil person, but weakness, sustained long enough, causes its own damage. Every time he said, "Just give her time," and walked away, he made a choice. He chose comfort over conscience. That choice has a cost, and he is paying it now in the particular silence that sits between us at the kitchen table some mornings. What kept me going was not anger. Anger burns fast and leaves you empty. What kept me going was something quieter, a kind of clarity that only comes when you finally stop hoping the situation will fix itself and decide to fix it yourself. I had to become, in those months of building my case with Patricia, more deliberate than I had ever been. I had to think clearly when I wanted to feel sorry for myself. I had to document when I wanted to cry. That discipline, that choosing of precision over collapse, was the hardest thing I've done since I buried Gerald and Chloe. I want to say something about Chloe because she is the part of the story I hold most carefully. She was 9 years old and she saw everything. Children always do. She watched her grandmother be diminished, and she chose, without anyone telling her to bring her puzzle pieces and her small, loyal presents to my door anyway. That is character. That is something no one taught her, or if they did, it wasn't her parents. I like to think some of it came from our Sunday mornings, our biscuits, our 1,000-piece covered bridge in Vermont. If I could say one thing to anyone in a house where they feel themselves shrinking, document everything. Find an attorney you trust, and remember that patience is not the same as surrender. I waited too long in some ways, but I did not wait forever. In the morning I came downstairs to my coffee maker on the counter, where it belonged, and opened the back door and saw that cardinal. I knew that the life I had been waiting to reclaim had been mine all along. I just had to be willing to ask for it back.